Hello everyone. Thank you for watching Energy Talk. So far in Energy Talk, we have been studying the mechanism and difficulties of stable electric supply. We have also studied the changes in Japan's power supply structure and the characteristics of renewables such as solar, wind, hydro, and geothermal power generation. Today, we will study thermal power generation, which is at the center of the various methods of power generation in Japan. As we have discussed before, thermal power generation has long been at the center of Japan's electric supply. Before the Fukushima nuclear accident, its share had dropped to about 60% of the total. But now that many nuclear power plants have been shut down, its independence on thermal power has increased to nearby 70 to 80%. There are three types of thermal power: coal-fired, oil-fired, and LNG-fired. The characteristics of each type differ depending on three factors: the price of fuel used, CO2 emissions, and stability of fuel supply. Simply put, coal is the cheapest, while oil and LNG prices linked. LNG has the lowest CO2 emissions, followed by oil and coal in that order. The stability of supply depends on the situation in the partner country, as they are all imported fuel. Compared in terms of stockpile capacity, petroleum has a large stockpile capacity of about 250 days, based on the lessons learned from the oil crisis. Coal has a capacity about 30 days, and LNG is difficult to store because it must be stored at minus 160 degrees Celsius, and thus has a capacity of about 2 weeks. As you can see, each has its advantages and disadvantages. With a focus on global warming, CO2 emissions are the most important issue. But after the invasion of Ukraine, the focus has shifted to security of supply. This is because, given the current high dependence on thermal power, the supply of electricity must be prioritized first, regardless of CO2 emissions. Thermal power generation still plays a very important role. Even under these circumstances, the role of thermal power generation is changing. As solar, wind, and other renewable energy sources increase, thermal power's ability to respond and adjust its power generation capacity to immediately generate electricity during times when the sun does not shine or the wind does not blow is becoming an extremely important role. However, a major problem exists here. For example, some thermal power plants generate power only at night, or suddenly stop generating power. When this happens, the unit cost per kilowatt hour of the power plant increases. Whether or not power is generated, the fixed and maintenance costs remain the same. Operator must also be on standby. However, the amount of electricity generated will be much less, so it will not be profitable at the same unit price. Since less time is spent generating electricity, the time spent idle becomes longer. And from the perspective of the power generation company, the power plant becomes an unprofitable facility that will eventually be decommissioned. In the case of Japan, the deregulation of electric power industry has accelerated this trend. Since electricity is sold competitively, facilities that can generate cheap electricity are heavily used, but unprofitable thermal power plants with few operating hours become a burden and are forced to be retired. Since many nuclear power plants were not operating in the first place, there was a shortage of power plants, and when thermal power plants broke down or LNG imports stalled, there was an immediate shortage of electricity. It is true that Russian invasion of Ukraine caused fuel prices to rise, resulting in supply shortages. But it must be noted that in the case of Japan, power supply shortages occurred multiple times before even the invasion of Ukraine. As mentioned above, thermal power generation plays a very important role, and it cannot be easily stopped, even as we move toward net zero CO2 emissions. Nevertheless, CO2 emission must be reduced. In the next energy talk, we will consider measures to reduce CO2 emissions from thermal power generation. Okay, that's all for today. Stay curious about energy. Thank you very much.